So this is what comes in the kit. There's several pieces or bags of hardware. Fortunately, they're labeled by the steps that you will use them in. There's the bridge itself. There's some pretty complete instructions here, and a very important and nice custom part is this extension for the brake line, which you really need in order to fit the bars comfortably, not strain the brake line. So this is the bike we're going to install the bridge on. It's my 2007 Yamaha FJR1300. Step 1 of 11 steps for installing the bridge is to remove the wire looms, cables, and hydraulic lines from in front of the triple clamp. Let me bring it in close here. We need to cut or saw that so that we can release these lines. Over here, you may not be able to see it, but this forms an open U. I was able to remove the throttle cables and the brake cable. Also this little cable that feeds into my Zumo. You can see that the area there, or the clip, is open at one end. So for this part of step 1, because the clearances are pretty tight in here, I'm going to be using a mini hacksaw like this one. As you can see, I've cut and moved out of the way the retainer bracket, and I'm able now to free up these lines and move these lines outside here like that. Doesn't have to be pretty, because all of these brackets are going to be removed in a later step. So the next part of this step is to cut this cable tie right here, which I'll do now. I forgot to mention that this bike is an AE version with the automatic clutch. So right here would be the last step if you have a regular mechanical or hydraulic clutch, and that is to remove the strap from the hydraulic line that would run here. Step 2 is the installation of that custom extension of the brake line that I showed you earlier. As you can see, I've pretty well covered the bike because we're going to be dealing with brake fluid. So the first part of this step is to remove this cover and slide it down the brake line. It's going to be used later on the extension. The next stage in this step is to remove this bolt that's holding the banjo fitting to the master cylinder. This is a 12mm nut or bolt. So this is a better view of that custom extension to the brake line. It's got a banjo bolt and then a fitting down here that will accept the old banjo bolt, and that fitting is secured here. Then there's a bleeder valve, which I can't get the top off of, right there. And this is the original bolt that came out of the main brake reservoir. So next we're going to attach the old banjo bolt to this fitting, or this extension, using this special bolt. We fit a copper washer on there, put it through here, fit another copper washer, and then thread on the extension. So next we take the original bolt that came off the master cylinder, slide a copper washer on there, slide it through the new banjo fitting, another copper washer, and then attach it back to the master cylinder. So finally you want to tighten these up. Make sure they're nice and snug. I've slipped the cover that we moved down earlier back over the bleeder valve. I also removed the black rubber covering here. And what you're supposed to do now is cut a slit right at the fitting so that you can slide this down. This next part of step 2 is a part that I'm a little apprehensive about. I've never bled a brake system before. So now we need to bleed the line here. This is one of the questions that I had for Heli, was whether you had to bleed the whole thing or just bleed out this extension. They quite clearly said all you have to do is bleed the extension. We'll bleed it from here. So I'm going to remove the reservoir cover. There we go. So now let me undo the fitting here a little bit. So, shame on me. I was doing this completely wrong. I talked to Harry at Heli. So step 3 involves rerouting the throttle cables to accommodate the new position of the handlebars. And the first thing we need to do is slip this little rubber cover down like that. What we're going to end up doing, and it's hard to see, but if you look down here, you'll see that the throttle cables are outside of the brake lines. In other words, they're outboard. And what we want to do is put them inboard of the brake lines. So the next part of this step is to loosen these 2 Allen bolts. They're 4mm hex bolts. Okay. Now we take the 2 control lines, slide them out. Okay, so after a bit of struggle, I got the throttle lines inside the brake lines, inboard. Now to reattach. We're going to remove that cable tie from its connection to the frame member there, and that's step 4. So there you have it. We've removed the cable tie from its mooring. So step 5 involves removing the stock handlebars from the top triple tree, removing this steering head nut, loosening the pinch bolts on either side of the top triple tree, taking the top triple tree off the forks, and removing the metal plate under the triple tree that holds these retainers that we cut earlier, and then reinstalling the top triple tree and tightening it back up. So in the first stage of step 5, we're going to remove the cover plates that sit on each of the handlebars. And then we want to remove the M8 screws using a 6mm hex head. And finally we need to remove the nuts that are actually holding the handlebars on. And slip the handlebars off on each side and lay them down on a piece of shop cloth on either side of the bike. And the next stage is to remove the steering head nut. And they suggest putting a piece of like note paper over it. There we go. Next stage is to loosen up the pinch bolts, taking weight off the forks and the steering head, and slipping out the thing to be removed is this. As you can see, that was the plate that was holding those retainers on. So now we have to reseat the top of the top triple clamp here. Put it back over the forks. Put a little upward pressure with your thighs on the front of the bike and slip it back down. Now all we need to do is reverse the process and put the triple clamp back together. So the pinch bolts need to be torqued to 18 foot-pounds. So this needs to be torqued to 85 foot-pounds. So now in step 6, we're going to install the bridge, starting with these M12 bolts that actually go through the old or the existing triple clamp and thread into holes in the bottom of the bridge. So I've dropped these hex bolts in to the front of the bridge, and you're supposed to secure them with a nylon lock nut and a washer. So I've torqued out the top bolts and the bottom bolts, and I think we're in good shape. So let's move on to step 7. So the first part of this step is to reinstall the handlebars using these pieces of hardware. We line up the dowels, drop in the washer, and start threading in the bolt here. So we'll do the same on the other side. Okay, so the final stage in this step is to install these bolts right in here. And you'll notice there's a bit of rotational play in the handlebars. That's intentional to adjust them to how you might like. And then we have to torque these out to 14 pounds, foot-pounds, and 28 foot-pounds. Okay, so we're just reinstalling the covers here. So you can see the registration marks here. Let me give you a better view. And I've decided to start out by keeping the handlebars in their widest position, and the other registry mark shows the handlebars in their more swept back and narrowest position, left to right. I tied off the control cable that comes from the right hand handlebar onto a little post on the bottom of the ignition body, and over here use the other zip tie to tie off the brake cable and the control cables from the right hand bar. Finally, down here I reattached one of the two legacy cables, or I'm sorry, legacy cable ties back to the frame, and that holds the control cables from the left hand bar.